And it's definitely time to celebrate the wonderful wisdom from some of your inhabitants. So I would love to welcome to the stage the first panel, which is all about the voices of today and tomorrow, and indeed yesteryear. But we'll get that to in a moment. So please, will you put your hands together and welcome to come and join me, Joanna, João, and Robin. And I think we're running a little behind time today, so we're going to get into this nice and fast. Thank you all so very much for coming today. None of you too far, which is nice. And we are blessed with beautiful blue skies and the ocean behind us, so I think we're getting good vibes in from all over the place. Why don't we all take a few minutes, well, you guys take a few minutes just to introduce yourselves and say a little bit about the work that you're doing, and then we're going to have a fun conversation between us all. Robin, shall we start with you, as you're right here next to me?
Sure. Thanks, Amber. My name's Robin Moore. I head up communications and marketing at Rewild. And Rewild is an organization that Mick so kindly pointed out earlier, alluded to. We work with partners around the world to protect and restore the wild, essentially because we believe that nature is the most effective solution to our interrelated crises of climate, biodiversity loss, and human health. And I think it's an important point to make. They are all interrelated, and we need to address them together. And nature is a thread that runs through it. So we believe that it's vitally important that we reconnect with nature, protect and restore nature, and we do so through those communities and partners on the ground that are vital to stewarding their homes. So our model is really to work through partnerships with partners, providing the resources, the support they need to effectively do what they've been doing for millennia, and just need that support to be able to continue to do.
And the vast majority of those are obviously indigenous communities.
A lot are indigenous communities.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when we talk about biodiversity, 80% of biodiversity is on land that is stewarded by indigenous communities, who are only 5% of the global population.
I'm so pleased you said that, because I was going to say otherwise, but it's more appropriate coming from you.
So you can't talk about biodiversity conservation without talking about the rights of indigenous peoples to their land, because you look at some communities like the Kayapo in the Amazon of Brazil, and you can see from space that when fire season comes, those areas that have been degraded are on fire, and you have this massive area that's just not on fire, that's protected because the Kayapo are there protecting it, and that's what comes naturally to them.
Yeah.
So just protecting their right to have ownership of their land and sovereignty is vital in this.
And that in itself is a beautiful example of, I am a big nature lover as well, and I know very little about technology, but this isn't that everything is connected. We are going to be reliant on technology as well as nature, and that's a beautiful example of the two working together.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, some of these, the more that we can harness the tools and technologies to enable more efficiencies, obviously the Kayapo are protecting their land if we can use technologies to enable that. And I think to bring to the world, that is a very striking visual example to me that connects on that visceral level, like this is what they're doing. So I think part of it is, harnessing technologies to protect our oldest technology, which is 4 billion years old, which is nature.
Absolutely. We'll move on to Joanna. Please, will you introduce yourself? I know a lot of the people in the audience will know you already because you're a leading figure.
I can't see the audience because the light is against me, which is probably better. So, hi, and thank you for the invitation. I'm the mother of 3. That's part of the work, I think, as well. And professionally, I've worked on sustainability issues forever, more than 20 years ago, even when all these concepts were sort of alien, and I was considered sort of alien. But most of this path has been in public policy, be it at local level or national or in the EU. And it's been really interesting to understand how public policy can be, best designed, best implemented, what are like the healthy ingredients that go into policy making. I think it's fascinating. And it's been great to understand the 3 layers. And recently, I decided to change to the private sector for the first time in my life and to understand sustainability from that perspective. To understand what drives or what blocks the corporate sector regarding sustainability, because both the public and the private are part of the solution. And it won't happen if we only have one side of the equation working. So I really, really want to understand the full equation. And so I'm working for Kaizen Institute. It's a consultancy firm. And it's a great observation place to see how different industries and different sized companies are diving into this issue. Yeah.
Thank you, Joanna. And João, it's lovely to get to meet you today in person. Please, will you tell everybody a little bit about your work that you're doing at the moment?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with this great panel. I have some different hats as a youth. Nowadays, when they call us to forums or when we are called, they say insert bio here. And so we need to insert our biography. And for me, it's very confusing because I'm a global shaper, which is an initiative from the World Economic Forum that was created for Professor Klaus Schwab in 2011, and we are in different hubs all around the world, from Europe, America, Asia, and we have different projects. And in the Lisbon hub, which is my hub, I have been since the pandemic bringing sustainability affairs, which was not a pillar, but it is a pillar right now. I'm also, I have mostly recently created a Generation Resonance, which is the youth protocol with United Nations Association Portugal to also bring sustainability, diversity, inclusion, the awareness to these topics, because we are living in a globalized world, but I think some of the youth are in their own bubble. So what I try to do is take them outside of the bubble with projects, with workshops, with our podcast. We have also a podcast, and
what's it called? Tell
it's
everybody
called
so they can
Tomorrow
listen.
Talks. Our podcast is called Tomorrow Talks, and we have interviewed a lot of people from the United Nations, from the public sector, from the private sector, and it's a one-on-one talk with someone who has done a lot for Portugal, and not only Portugal, but for the world, and we try to understand what drives them, so we can also bring that light to the youth. Because I think sometimes they think that it's not possible. And for example, I have been awarded First 30 Under 30 in their first year of sustainability and social innovation. So this category was created this year. So it's very important to understand that nowadays sustainability is also being searched for in magazines or in international forums. And it's a very good perspective to bring to the youth. So that's the work I've been trying to give to everyone.
Well, you're doing incredible things, as are so many young people around the world today. It was definitely a key driver when we started the Extreme Hangout. Looking at the Greta effect, as I called it, young people were becoming mobilized, and they were picking up their placards and they were marching around outside Parliament buildings the world over. And on the one hand, I went and marched with them, and I absolutely was there to support and champion them. On the other hand, my heart was rather broken over that too, because I was like, oh my gosh, have we pushed it so far? Have we made young people feel so disempowered that they are now driven literally to leave their classrooms and take to the streets in order to try and gain our attention? And that for me felt like hideous, actually. And that was one of the reasons it mobilized me. At Extreme, we're all about extreme and adventure sports. It's like, what are we doing in the climate space? But I was like, well, if young people want to get in there, and by the way, most of our community are young people, it's like, right, we have to get up there and create a platform for them. So that's why we are always very proud to have young people. And this is very much about our talk today, is the different lenses, the different cultures, different communities, different age demographics, different societies. I don't care which postcode you live in or what kind of upbringing you had, what type of education you had. We all have a right to have our voice heard today. And we're going to start with the voice of today. I mean, Robin, you've already spoken and you've touched on nature. I'm a big fan of encouraging any of you guys who sit on boards out there to pull up an extra chair at your boardroom table and say that that is the chair for nature, so that any decision that might be made on behalf of your company, or indeed as part of political decisions, that they consider nature.
100%. Well, I'm young in my head, even if my age tells a different story. So when you talk about young boys,
Head and heart, I'm sure.
but I've seen, when I started in conservation, actually, it was, I did a PhD in biodiversity conservation, started 25 years ago. It was a very different landscape. Very few people got, it was still, you know, climate change was still up for denial, you know. I think we've come a long way so far, and it's incredible to see so many young voices now at the table being heard, indigenous voices being heard. Finally, we're recognizing that we need these new voices, fresh voices. Still, we're having separate conversations. You know, we have a climate COP, we have a biodiversity COP. We're still seeing these things as separate issues that I think.
And we have a desertification COP as well.
And a desertification COP.
Not
Three
very many
COPs.
people know about that.
Yeah, true. Not many people do.
No one ever talks about it.
No. So I think, you know, I think we're finally recognizing and bringing nature to the table, which is vital. You know, I think finally we recognize that you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. And I think the systems we built to quantify how we monitor progress is kind of like a football team who counts the goals it scores and not those that are scored against it. So as we sort of pillage nature, we're not counting what we're losing as we do so, we're counting what we're gaining. And I think, you know, finally we're recognizing that, and businesses are recognizing that business models are dependent on biodiversity and nature. And we're finally seeing companies as well. You know, I think part of the challenge is we've reduced everything to climate, and we've reduced climate to carbon, and the carbon footprint, and I think we're missing about the wood for the trees when we think of it like that too, because when you reduce it to such a simple metric, you're not recognizing that these incredible biodiverse old ecosystems like the Amazon are not replaceable with something that, you know, could be planted elsewhere. So as well as planting trees, restoring, we do need to recognize we're losing some things that are irreplaceable. And we do need to value them and have a system that incorporates that value. So I think recognizing and giving that a seat at the table, and that's where I think a lot of the indigenous ways of life and wisdom comes in, because they don't see themselves as separate from that. We do, and the language we use reflects that. We talk about the environment as if it's something there. We are nature, and we are, like, giving it a seat at the table should not be something separate. It should be woven into everything we do and talk about.
It should be. But symbolically, I think the chair can be quite useful. Helps lead people
The chair
in
can
that
be really
direction.
useful, 100%. No, I'm all in favor of that, because it gives it a place, because we don't think of it that way, I think, and it changes that mindset of there should be a voice for nature at every decision.
Definitely. Joanna, if I can move to you, I mean, you've spent so much of your life in public service, and the language of politics has helped move the agenda around climate so far, but we're still losing. And now with your corporate role, are you starting to, or was it apparent to you beforehand where politics was failing and how the message was either too complicated for wider populations to understand and to be able to grasp on? And are you seeing sort of new magical tools that are coming into your life now because you've got a more corporate perspective that you can overlay with your political knowledge as well?
Big question. I think initially, actually, the complicated language was coming from science, unfortunately. And for a very long time, it was sort of opaque. It was scientists were doing a really good job, and the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is an amazing example of scientific cooperation. There's more than 1,000 scientists from all over the world just analyzing data and studies and then sitting amongst peers to bring to policymakers, to politicians, the best available science so that they can decide upon. And that's amazing, because all the member states have to sign the IPCC reports, and then COP decisions are made based on IPCC reports. So that's amazing. But for a very long time, science was not communicating to normal citizens and was not communicating to policymakers. So I think that was an important hurdle to overcome. So that was part of the magic, I think, now that science is more accessible. And then what other things that made all this more accessible was, even though COPs are a lot of blah, 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 and they are, and I've been to COPs for ages, when nobody cared about COPs, and I was just a geek going to a conference somewhere, and media was not playing a role, but now media is playing a role. We can discuss how good or bad it is, but at least COPs and the results of COPs and issues like climate change and biodiversity degradation are on some front pages. Mm-hmm. So that was also part of the solution, because it raises public awareness.
And there's also one thing called right now, which is the COP effect. There was a report by the United Nations that, because people were talking about COP, what is the effect of COP? Because it's only 2 weeks. What's the effect of COP? The effect of COP is putting all year round the topics of climate. We have the Bonn conference and then the COP. What's happening is they measured, since they started doing COPs, what would be the effect without the COP and with COP. Without the COP, they say that will be 4 degrees higher, not 2.5, not 1.5, not 1, but 4 degrees. So we see that by putting this climate affairs and this climate agenda all year round, at least negotiations, is it good, is it bad, it has helped us in a certain way, and they have also called it the COP effect. So just adding that up.
I wasn't aware of that, but that's
effect.
useful to know. And you're right, I mean, COP are not 2 weeks, COPs are, those negotiators work all year round, and it's a very tough job. Of course, they have big eye bags during the 2 weeks of the COP, but I think another magic touch was when, for a long time, it seemed that climate change or even environmental degradation was something that they had to sort. They, like a mysterious figure, probably governments, but just they. And then enabling became closer to each person. So, and to different organizations. And one of the important steps was when cities realized that they had a role to play. And they were not doing their policies just because it's nice and because it's morally correct, but they understood that votes could come from it. So, well, if it's win-win, that's fine, right? If a municipality is restoring its river creeks, and that's great for biodiversity, and that's great for prevention of floods, because they're taking out cement and putting in nature-based solutions, and it's also good for votes, because it means there's more leisure and people can walk alongside the river. But it's win-win. It doesn't matter. As long as more actors are brought into the solution, and we're breaking a huge complex problem into smaller portions, and organizations and companies realize they have a role to play. And going back to cities, when the Trump administration decided they would leave the COP meetings and UNFCCC, many major US cities gave one step forward and said, we're not stopping. We're not stopping, and we know how much our emissions represent. I mean, cities represent 70% of emissions all over the world. And companies have an important role to play as well. And just to finish, sorry, one last touch of magic, which is a really boring, non-sexy one, but I can get back to that and try to make it more sexy afterwards, is legislation. And I think in the EU, it's been a major game changer.
It certainly has.
It has, but I don't want to monopolize.
No, don't worry. And I don't think anybody ever needs to apologize for talking about law. There's an organization called Client Earth that I'm particularly familiar with. It operates in the UK and the US and much more broadly around the world. I am constantly mesmerized by their achievements. I always think that writing law and legislation stuff takes forever, but actually, thank God, they started doing some of this years ago, and we're seeing the benefits of it already, and thank God they started that process then. And of course, the more we all see benefits, the more it's easier for us to then kind of go, ooh, that looks cool, I'm going to lean in over here, because I can see the changes that are coming about. João, just to come back to you, so may I ask how old you are?
Yes.
You don't have to say, but you can.
No, I'm 22. Actually, I've just graduated law school, and I think legislation and law is kind of sexy.
Great. We moved on to the right.
it doesn't need to be boring, and that is the kind of approach I try to do with everything I do. For example, I write for some national magazines, and my articles are decomplifying the CSRD and the CSDDD. You know, what does it take? What does it take to the banking sector, to the environmental sector? What needs to be done? For example, this week I evaluated a report from the United Nations that it talks about the state of human rights with sustainability. So, and it's a very complex report, 40-some pages, no images, so you know, only strange graphs. And I do those kinds of evaluations because I think sometimes not only scientists do a very strange way of portraying the information, but lawyers and regulators also do it in a very different, and for people that are not used to it, they don't know what it takes. For example, I like to talk about numbers and statistics when we talk about the sustainability agenda and the sustainable development goals, which we all love. In my presentations, I always have a slide with the Brundtland report, which for me was a change of mindset in the terms of the world, and then the Millennium Objectives, and right now the Sustainable Development Goals. Putting in an outlook and a general outlook, we have done 12 to 17% of what it needs to be done. 40% or to 42% have stagnated, and 30% have deviated from what it needed to be done. And I think the youth has a lot to do with this and to advance this agenda. The United Nations has done some resolutions talking about the importance of the youth, and right now we see young startups, we see those strikes, we see lots of projects which try to put the youth to talking. For example, one of the things I do with my project is we try to put the young people in Portugal to COPs. I have presented in last year at COP28 in the Portuguese pavilion my project, which was a green charter. I listened to teens in Portugal to try to understand what were their major concerns and what we could do. So right now I'm trying to do a road to Baku, to the COP29, with these issues that they have talked about. And one of the things was a platform. They feel like they're not listened. They feel like whenever there's a problem, they are very disconnected with the government, with the executive. So my podcast tries to be a platform with those people. What do they do? How can I achieve that? Try to understand a day-to-day in a CEO in a sustainability major firm. Because nowadays, the jobs don't need to be a firework or a policeman. You can be a CEO, you can be a woman CEO, you can be a sustainability advisor, you can be an international advisor. And that's what I'm trying to talk and to tell Portuguese youth, that our voices can actually be heard because we are part of a bigger solution.
Well, if anyone in this audience was in any doubt as to the value that young people can bring to the conversation, I'm pretty sure João has just enabled you to see very clearly that it is incredibly important to have that. And when the Greta effect all sort of came about, I mean, that's why I asked you how old you were. It wasn't for no reason, but you were clearly very young, sort of maybe 15, 16 years old.
We see, and in Portugal we heard a lot about Greta, and I just did law. I was very, should I do international?
Were you already planning to do law then?
I wasn't, and climate just stood, I was in first year of university, and then a professor of mine told me that there was an organization in New York called Global Alliance for a Sustainable Planet that was doing a lot. What they were doing is leveraging private funds to public causes. And they were just building their team, people from LSE, people from all around the world, and he said they are accepting interns. And there's no Portuguese on that team, only my daughter, and I think you'll be a great addition to these teams. So I was working with Satya, and Satya was the right man of Antonio Guterres in the United Nations. So during my 6 months that I was interning there, my day-to-day was the G7, the G20, analyzing reports, analyzing difficult things, trying to advise not only countries but all NGOs and also microstates to what they could do, and we were doing partnering to greater objectives. For example, one of the biggest things I think I've done during my 6 months, except from those reports, I helped in their project for COP 26, 27. I helped their project for the New York Climate Week with the Net Zero project, and we organized directly from New York, the biggest ocean cleanup in India, in Andhra Pradesh. So directly from there and with our partners and with the youth.
I think I've seen video footage of that. It's
so
staggering
what we
was
can
achieved.
do by leveraging our connections and our
so
partners.
we'd be like having a whole limb cut off, if not 2 limbs, by not including the youth voice, and that's absolutely one of the key reasons, certainly at Extreme Hangout, we always make sure we've got these passionate, fabulous young people on stage trying to go, yeah, of course.
It's about youth, and I don't know if you agree, but I've heard lots of global leaders say, youth is our hope, which, translated between the lines means, we messed up, here, have the hot potato, and now you sort it out. I think that's really unfair. I hate when they say that. I would never say that because everybody has to be part of the solution. It's totally unfair to give youth the hot potato and say you sort it out because clearly we've messed up and now it's not our problem anymore. We still have to be part of the solution. Of course, involving you guys. And another thing I don't like is when people say youth are the future, because that's not true.
You're the future.
Yeah, and you're the present as well. Okay.
And right now, we are the future. We will be the future. Our kids will be the future. No, everyone's the future. And there's the CEO of Patagonia, which is a brand that I like. Every time he talks, he says something like, for us to do some action, we need to actually do it. Because if we are thinking about, oh, it's only my action, I will not be able to do it, and everyone in this room thinks like that, this will be a free riding problem, because nobody will stand up and nobody will do anything. And I agree with your position, and sometimes I think that this dialogue gets really extremated, which is right now the adults have not done the right thing, so let's forget everything they've done, let's do it by scratch. I think we can learn, and we don't need to disconnect, because science was not what it is, technology was not what it is, so right now we have new means to be part of the solution. We have AI, we have globalization. So, what I try to do is I try to speak with my mentors, people who I work with and I admire, to try to understand their vision and how can they help us to bring our ideas to reality.
I agree with you 100%. Don't ever let anybody tell you we do not have the tools required to solve these issues today. We do. Frankly, we're sitting in the equivalent of a Formula One style garage. we have everything. So we can all get on and go and do it. Now, very much because I know we don't have a huge amount of time, so we've kind of spoken about the mobilization of today. With the lens of tomorrow, I did a really interesting exercise a couple of years ago. I was attending an event at the World Economic Forum, and we were put into pairs. This is very World Economic Forum in style. We were told to sit into pairs, and then one of us pretended the other person was me. You are me, Robin. And then you had to think about the conversation that 80-year-old me would have with me today, and what 80-year-old me might tell me today. So that's me in the future looking back at me today. And it was so exciting and inspiring to think like that, and galvanizing. I mean, we all leapt up and shot out of the room afterwards because of course 80-year-old you is going to look at you today and say, come on, you can do it. and they're not going to say, oh no, don't do so much of that, and don't ever go out into nature, and spend more time at work. In fact, they're going to say quite the opposite, and really help to deliver magic, like real magic, back into our lives, because we so often get lost behind our laptops and in our books and stuff like that. And Robin, I was thinking about what nature could look like, say, by 2050, if we, excuse my French, get our shit together. And really, all of us, everybody in this room, so for the locale of Cascais, for cities, because we're in one, and there are brilliant green spaces, as we can see, in cities around the world today, but then the world as a whole, for indigenous communities, really enabling them to protect the Earth's living systems, our living systems. Small question, just a few thoughts.
just a small one. So 2 weeks ago, I was in London with Chief Raoni, who 94 years old, and I saw him up earlier in the video. Incredible advocate, for decades, has been championing and protecting his home. And he opened Glastonbury this year, and obviously has many words of wisdom, and has seen, operating in a very different time, is also very vocal and supportive of the changes that are needed, dismantling the patriarchy. And I think what's really inspiring to me is seeing many of the young, inspirational leaders that are coming up are female indigenous leaders, because I think if women were running the world, we'd be in a much better place than we are. And I think one example, and I think the youth voice is coming in with that energy, vitality, and I think we talk about optimists and pessimists. I think there's possibilities. I think when we look at what's possible, I think they see different things being possible. And one thing I've been really inspired by is in Ecuador, there's, Nina Gualinga, incredible, inspirational activist, grew up in a region that Ecuador has been oil dependent for 50 years. It's a system that is really hard to change. Nina has been sort of a champion for her communities and her home, and protecting it from oil for many years. Her and her sister, Helena Gualinga, who's even younger and just incredible force, and have been mobilizing youth activists, and they managed to get a referendum on the table in Ecuador by mobilizing 5% of the community to call for this referendum on whether to close down an oil field in Yasuni, which is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. And we worked with them, and again, I think it's sort of like our role is often, how do we connect the voices that should be heard and who we think are the real influencers and celebrities with the celebrities that we tend to fetishize, and give their platforms to the ones. So I think Mick mentioned that we were founded by Leonardo DiCaprio, one of our founders. He is really passionate about lending his platform to those he thinks should have that platform and that voice. So we work with them just to help amplify, and again, we don't, these solutions have to come from the ground and have to come from giving ownership to the communities. And they managed to rally and mobilize and get 60% of Ecuador to vote in favor of closing down this oil field, which for me is a historic vote in favor of people and planet over this quick profit for a few. So I see the tide moving. And again, we mentioned media earlier. 98% of environmental stories out there are framed in a negative way, because the media loves a train wreck, and we are tuned to, to respond to that sort of threats and negative stories. I think there are a lot of positive stories like that we need to celebrate, lift up, and take inspiration from. and try to create this network of people who are really winning and bringing that youthful energy and just like, you know, possibility of what can be achieved if you do mobilize and hold the feet to the fire of those entrenched in power who need to be challenged.
Definitely. I mean, I mentioned earlier, you go to these COPs and they're all huge conference room, over air conditioned, uncomfortable chairs, blah, blah, blah. That's why we insist when we do the extreme hangouts, there's food, there's bean bags, there's drinks, we're going to have some live music, we're going to show some movies, we got fashion. You want people to lean in, you got to make it cool and fun and sexy and engaging. And Joanna, what does 2050 look like if you get to implement your dream plans right now? And we're going to have to ask you to be real quick because we've got to wrap up in a second. I think just only because I want to leave the audience with like, yes, that's a vision. That's something that I can get behind and work towards, and I'm going to support you to do this.
I don't know if everybody has in mind, I love this graph, and I started showing it in my new corporate role in trainings and presentations. It's the Earth Overshoot Day graph, where you have, like, since 1970 something, how much biocapacity was available to us, and how fast we're depleting it every year. So biocapacity is everything that nature provides, basically, for our food and for building and whatever, everything that sustains us coming from nature. And so, of course, each year, the green part of the bar is decreasing, and the red part of the bar is increasing, which means we're living in deficits. We're borrowing from nature every year. So nature does not have time to replenish itself from everything we are eating from it, biting away from it. So
what day was that this year?
I can't remember. I think it's already been, actually.
It has.
It was now in July, but I can't remember which day.
Do you know, for me, I always think of it a little bit like on the 1st of January, you've got a fully stocked larder. It's got everything you could possibly need in there, and you've eaten it out by July. That means you're going to be pretty skinny come December, in my view, if you're still alive.
We need at one point something planet to continue.
No, you don't.
No, we don't reach December, and it's totally unfair because a North American person will consume like 90 kilos per, I think, year or month or whatever, and a European 45, and in Ghana it's like 9. So it's very unfair. But for 2050, I would love to see all those bars very green, because that would show that we've really done it.
Yeah.
And I think, just on a very positive note, I think we do have a very cool constellation happening. There are bad news, and that brings about climate anxiety, etc. But also, you know, like climate and environmental literacy and public perception are there. Regulation or regulators, policy makers, lawmakers are making it happen. All segments of society are feeling that they are part of the solution, and because they are part of the problem. And even those that don't, regulation, the non-sexy regulation, is making them become forcefully part of the regulation, because CSRD, the directive, you can't escape it, and there will be penalties if companies are not on board. That as well. So I think also technology is on our side, and I don't have social networks, but obviously it is a very powerful tool. If we don't sort it out now, I think we will lose it. So, you know, science, technology, public pressure, knowledge,
innovation.
And just empirically feeling that we're losing it. If that doesn't drive us, then we'll lose it. But I think we will never have as perfect a constellation as we do now.
I couldn't agree more. And to take that on, so Sarah, you get to have the last words here. And very much as Joanna said before, it's not about putting all of this pressure on young people. You guys don't just have to carry that. And for me, this whole idea of 8 billion imperfect environmentalists is what we need. So whether you want to dip your toe into the green paint and greenify just that bit of you, but once you've done that, it kind of gets easier. It sort of creeps up, and it has a way of taking over and fulfilling and embodying your life. But I use that word fulfilling with purpose as well, because when you start to live more consciously, it brings a sense of peace. It certainly has been done to me. Happiness, sharing, joy, community, all of those great things. And one of the most exciting tools, which I think young people have really helped to spur as well and draw people in, is through social media and social culture. And bringing in sports personalities, bringing in fabulous movie stars like Leonardo, bringing in musicians and artists and chefs and fashionistas and gamers even. And gaming terrifies me, but anyway. Does that help you? Because I know you come at this from a brilliant and now very intellectual, and your work that you're doing, your maritime paper that I know you're delivering to the Parliament on Monday. I'm so impressed and excited. But do you feel like young people around you, whether they are empowered in the same way that you have empowered yourself, are also feeling galvanized?
You know, these things that we have, they are supercomputers that we have on our hands every day. And I feel like I had a session last week with a Portuguese thought and creative. He said that we are now living in the silence of noise, you know, because we have never been so connected like we are right now. But do you remember, like my parents said that in the 80s, in the 70s, everyone would go to our houses. Right now, we almost need a permission to go to other people's houses, you know. We are more connected online than we are connected like here, face to face, and listening to other stories. And just like smiles are contagious, I think also energy is contagious. And sometimes...
Thank goodness, because we've got Vanessa in here, and she's the third greatest source of renewable energy in the world. So we're going to be powered up.
and it's true. And I think we cannot always see the bright side on everything. There's a lot of fake news, even from people my age. You know, we are living in a world right now that there are still movements that say that Earth is plan and that climate change doesn't exist, you know. There are people that say that climate change doesn't exist in our world. So we need to fight that. And I think with our phones, I think with our projects, mobilizing youth, we are the most literate teens and kids and change makers in the world, so we can use that, but we need help. You know, I'm very fortunate to be here today and representing the youth on Monday, the Parliament, at the other day and last week. You know, I've been in all forums, and that's why I created my movement, because I know there are a lot of Joãos like me all around the world, and I want to be connected with them. And this wouldn't be possible without internet. So we need to take people, like I say, outside of the bubble, and we contage people by what we do. You know, there are a lot of messages that I receive every day via LinkedIn, via Instagram. How can I do this? How can I do that? Is there a spot for, I have this idea, I have this project, you know? And I like to connect people. Whenever I see a possibility that, you know, I'm not a robot, but I feel like I know the person who can help this or that, we can use our networks to do good. And I think if we take the people outside of the bubbles, outside of the fake information, outside of the let me just be on the couch. There's a thing that I said on my Forbes pitch. There's a pitch, it's not only awards, that I said, the sentence I like, in this spaceship, we are not passengers. We are all on crew. We are all one crew. We are not passengers, you know. I'm not here waiting to the world to destroy himself or to the world to repair itself. You know, we can be part of the solution. One action a day, you know, it's like keeps the doctor away, but one action away can help the world to be better energized, to be better filled with people who want to move it. It's just like we said, the demographics will be skyrocketing. Let's skyrocket that demography with people who are filled with energy to do good. And I think Joanna wanted to... No? Okay.
What a perfect place to end. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you.